Welcome back to another episode of the AI Journal podcast. Today, we are joined by Chris Royles from Cloudera. Very exciting episode of bringing you today following our success at Web Summit. This is an area that was talked about a lot of innovation going on in this area, a lot of expert knowledge in the area, and it really is the way that we're going in the future. So we're really proud to bring you Chris from Cloudera to talk around these topics that we've got today. And before we get started, Chris, we'd love to know a bit about you, sir. So what your background is, what's your origin story, and how did you go into this role with Cloudera today?
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to meet with you this morning. So if I step back, we're going back a few years now, back to the early 2000s. So I was always fascinated with computers, and the reason being is my father kind of built his own. He built a NASCOM way back, and probably was the only family on the street with a computer at that point in time. And part of the reason for him doing that was it was part of his work. So he kind of worked from home in part, in that he used to help program in industrial computers for his business that he worked at. So I was very close to computers from a very early age. He had computers before I could even read books. So that was very interesting as part of my life. And as such, I was always exposed to kind of things like spectrums and things of that nature and Amigas. Fascinated by computers. And I remember the days when if you wanted to play a computer game, you had to program it yourself from the back of a Byte magazine. So those are kind of days that I used to recall. When I left school, I kind of went through straight into university and studied computer science at university. And I was fortunate as part of that journey to be able to stay on at Liverpool University for my postgraduate studies. And I did a PhD in artificial intelligence. It's worth defining what that means, because I always say the thing with doing research is it's very time limiting, depending on the types of research you do. It gave me a lot of learning. So I learned how to step back and look critically at problems people are trying to solve. You always spend the first year of your research trying to work out what you want to do. You then take the second year doing the reading and the research, and you take the third year writing it all up, and you better have captured all of the references. So one thing that I do in my career is always make sure I write everything down, and I always like to do the research behind what I do. But that research led me to developing a number of principles in machine learning or methods in machine learning around at those points in time, which were very much expert system driven. And I remember a project I worked on, which was around helping take legislation, complicated legislation, I think in terms of benefits, types of benefits an individual could claim depending on their housing or their child status or whatever, and trying to simplify that, make that easier for people to understand. So I did a lot of work around how to interpret legislation, turn that into rules and an expert system, and then help support people in learning how that legislation applied to their particular circumstances. And it was quite interesting because way back then it led me to think about things like individuals' privacy. We're talking very sensitive information here. People's individual information. And so one of the kind of innovations, I'd say, at that point is you could literally take your fact base with you. The idea was each human would have a fact base associated with them in terms of where they live, the number of children, that kind of thing. And then the expert system would apply the rules against those facts, but the person could always take their personal information away with them. And it was quite an interesting and kind of novel approach back then. So coming out of university, that sort of gave me a lot of foundation in research and helped me understand machine learning and AI in terms of breadth, because I had to do that research to understand it.
Love it. It's a great backstory as well, because you really touched on a point there, Chris, which we love to do at AI Journal, which is making notes and understanding the kind of research behind it. And just quickly, from the experience you've got as well from Cloudera, they've actually put together a book, so a fresh squeeze on data, which you've got with us here, which is a great read. And it's really awesome to see that Cloudera is really taking this initiative to teach younger generations and to make these kind of what can be seen as tricky topics, right, quite understandable and quite clear. And it's a real great point, because making sure we see it all the time. And me and Kieran have interviewed some great companies, and looking at from where the roadmap is, if you don't understand the strategy or you don't understand the research behind it, you're probably not going to have a very successful business, or you're not going to have a very successful answer. So that brings me on to my first question. Now we're delving into it. What is the importance of analytics today? Because that is essentially, to me, I see it as research. Kieran's got a very big background in analytics and data analytics. But what does it mean to you, Chris? And how important is it? Maybe you've got some ideas of different functions or different companies. Paint a picture for us, if you could, please.
Certainly. So if you sort of step back, our mission is to make analytics and data accessible to a wider community, make it easier to use. And that's what we hope to do at Cloudera through our technology. And again, my journey, my career has sort of always been aligned with data and analytics in some form. So I started my career in telecommunications. So straight out of college with a kind of research background, and I went into voice recognition of all things, again, back in the early 2000s. And that was helping people, book a train, for example, but use voice recognition as part of that booking process. And I remember things like capturing an international telephone number via voice is actually quite challenging, because you can have between 12 and 15 digits. And so you had to be very, very good at being able to do that. And again, back then, it was very database oriented. So that was my break into sort of into employment, and I worked in telecommunications. I then transitioned through a number of different organizations. One was a geospatial company called MapInfo. So what was interesting there was the complexity of the data. It was all spatially related. And the interesting aspect where I applied machine learning was in crime science. So I spent a little bit of time in crime science, helping to, I suppose, support the standard processes around identifying patterns in crime. And it's really about helping teams of data scientists or crime scientists at that time apply standard process, just standard methodology and research to a problem, but do it in a repeatable and well-defined way. And what I thought was quite interesting is when I was doing that, everything was backed at that time by an Oracle spatial database. So from a spatial company, I ended up joining Oracle and doing a lot of work in business analytics at Oracle. And then the Oracle journey was quite fascinating because they built appliances, they built hardware appliances. And in those hardware appliances, the whole objective of those was to help accelerate analytics, do it very, very fast, very efficiently, and help, I suppose, deliver that business intelligence to a wider, more diverse audience. But in one of their appliances, they shipped the Cloudera stack. So the Cloudera technology shipped in the big data appliance. And that was one of the appliances I kept connecting my business analytics tools to all the time, because that had such a vast amount of data available for businesses to do their analysis on. And so as I went through my journey, I started learning more and more about why big data became more important in the analytic workloads that are being carried out, the types of insight you can get from larger volumes of data. I remember a retailer saying to us on their website, one of the things you helped us with was people could search for products, using a natural language search. It was great, but we weren't capturing it. We were missing out on certain types of product. And it turned out that by adding the product codes into the search engine, we could boost their route from the customer to product. We could accelerate that and get more matches. And it's simple use cases like that had a huge impact from an analytics perspective. Really think about the customer, what the customer is looking to achieve. What they're really looking to achieve is find that product, the one that they really want. People are just putting product codes in. So that gave me my journey into Cloudera. And from that point, it's been absolutely amazing in terms of really understanding what data can bring to an organization.
So Chris, tell us a little bit more about, if you can name some of the Cloudera clients, or at least some of the industries. Bring that a little bit to life for us. What are you doing? What's the business outcomes they're actually achieving from your technology?
Yeah, certainly. So if we look at some of our customers, Cloudera, when we roll into, if we think into how we go into different geographies and what we do in different geographies, we tend to look for a financial services organization and maybe a government organization as a way of priming our markets as we roll into different geographies. And so we have quite a breadth of customers in that space. And I could talk about some of our customers in that space. So think financial services. One of our clients is Santander. So you may well be a customer of Santander, and you have a mobile phone banking application. Again, all of this is published on our website. You can go to our blog, Cloudera, search Santander. You can see some of the details about how we built this with them. And what's really interesting is there was a point in time when a certain organization invented a new payment model, think Apple Pay, and Santander wanted to be one of the first to deliver that. And one of the criteria around that was a set of SLAs that were put in place such that the mobile banking application had to handle a transaction in a certain time frame and provide a notification back to the device that the transaction had taken place. And I thought it was really fascinating, because what Santander do is they deliver two use cases at a time. The way they execute is they'll say, we'll deliver a use case for the customer. So we'll make an improvement in the mobile banking app, but we'll also look to see if that use case can apply for the bank as well. And there's a bit of an ML machine learning angle on this one. So what they did was they made sure that all of the customers could access all of their records, all transactions in history, and put that in the palm of the hand. So you don't just see 1 month, you can scroll right through every transaction you've ever had. But what does that mean to the bank? Well, it means that they've got a wider range of data across which they can do things like fraud and error. So they can do analysis across a wider data set on behalf of each client. The other thing that they do is then aggregate that data up into a summary report, so you know where you're spending your money. You know that you're spending money on food, spending money on goods and services, and they can break that down for you. So what they're doing is delivering a kind of personalized business intelligence and analytics service to the customer. And then at the back end, they're delivering greater analytical capability to the bank as well. So that's a really good example. And I do like their approach of executing these two use cases in parallel. When you think, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I love that approach there, because very often companies don't. They do one test, that's it, move on to the next test. But presumably working with both tests, you can find out double or faster information than anything else.
Yeah. We're seeing the same patterns forming elsewhere as well. So very recently, I spoke to a customer of ours in heavy industry. So they make steel. And what was fascinating with the work we've done with them is they wanted to drive down the cost of energy. It's a very energy intensive process that they carry out, and they wanted to implement a set of machine learning to help them make that more efficient. But before they did that, first of all, they needed to understand how machine learning could be applied to the business, and they needed to generate real value. So what they looked at is the data. They've been collecting the data off all of their systems for a number of years, and so they collected and aggregated quite a large volume of data. So they were able to use machine learning to start turning certain dials. And there's 3 things that they wanted to do. One was make things quicker. The second was at a level of quality that's correct, and the third was at lower energy cost. And in that order, I thought it was quite interesting. So what they started to do is turning certain dials, not by human hands, but by machine learning. So right on their production lines, they started turning these dials. And what you find is a dial that you can turn maybe 5 or 6% in terms of how much product we can get through a process can generate a huge yield at the end. And in their case, it was 100,000 units more every year, which amounts to millions of dollars of value. And what was interesting is by doing that, they were then able to say, okay, we now understand how this works. We've industrialized it and put it into production. Now we can start worrying about reducing the energy cost of this as well. So the project they're working on right now is to reduce the energy consumed by the generators and processes that they have on the plant, to reduce the use of energy, therefore, in theory, drive down the use of things like carbon.
Oh, so wow. That's kind of like sustainable AI, for want of a better phrase.
I think the interesting thing is they needed to demonstrate a capability before they could then go after the really important thing that they now want to go after. Again, their ability to turn down that use of energy is going to be in the single-digit % at this point, because it is such an energy-intensive process. But anything at this point is a gain for them. The interesting thing, though, having this conversation with them is if you're generating more product and it's at a level of quality that meets your criteria, but it's generating a huge outcome in terms of dollars, you kind of ask yourself two questions. One is, can you ever stop doing that then? So if you generate a certain amount of money in a quarter, you've got to keep doing that quarter by quarter. So we call this sort of model operations. You've got to be able to take a formal process around, one, industrializing your process, and two, maintaining it. Now, in their case, they don't really have to worry too much about model drift or any changes in the model's behavior, because pretty much everything stays consistent. But if they want to continue to improve, they might need to look at retraining their model. So that model ops piece becomes really important, because now they've got a production function that's pretty much critical to their business and the performance of their business as it is today. You can't switch that off anymore.
You have to be careful what you wish for, then you create such success that it's unsustainable. Maybe the team who wrote the AI model need to dial it down a little bit.
So it leads to another question, which is, can you actually wait to put this into production? So one of the dynamics we have with customers is some of the results they can generate from some of these processes can be so big, they've got to get there really fast. Yeah. We have to your point, kind of temper their enthusiasm by saying, we don't necessarily know this is going to work. We might have to fail a few times to get there. And so the two questions are, can you get there quick enough? And two, when it's there, can you keep it running? But behind the scenes, obviously, is culture. Are you prepared to fail as we go on this journey?
Because that's an interesting point, because I always taught that elusive triangle: time, cost, quality. Which two do you want? Because you're not getting all three, but what you're describing is all three. I love that case study. Let me jump you on just a little tiny bit, if you don't mind, Chris. I'm an absolute fan of education. It's allowed me to come out of relative poverty, and we were mentioned earlier on the book. What have you been doing teaching kids about the future? Why is that particularly important? Because some of the things you're describing there, we've talked about analytics. Myself and Tom were at the Web Summit last week. Analytics, machine learning, and AI. You sound like you're preparing the next generation of talent for what will be the future of the work, which sounds more like now than the future.
I think there's a number of elements to this. I think one is obviously the book, and it's helping younger children understand the importance of analytics, of numbers, but the practice of that as well. So when you read through that book, without giving too much away, it's kind of like a retail scenario for us. So it goes through a retail scenario, and it kind of helps you understand things like footfall, and how could we do more of this? So it's quite an interesting problem that they're trying to solve. But then towards the back, we go through some of the sort of methods you can apply, but we do it in a language which is very we used it earlier in our mission statement, accessible, and I think that's a really interesting aspect to it. It makes it accessible to a younger audience. But we also work with other organizations as well. So we work with a number of universities on helping them with the technology and enabling them so that they're able to take on this technology that we provide, but then apply it with the right learning as well. And there are certain customers that we work with. So we work with an organization in the UK, a stats authority in the UK. It's the Office of National Statistics. We do have a press release that we jointly authored with them. They have a subsidiary as part of what they do called the Data Science Campus. And when that was founded, it was really about helping. And by the way, I'm talking about one of our clients here, and it's their initiative. This Data Science Campus is something that they recognized a need for. It's about helping bring together individuals, both in research and not in research, and connecting them to businesses that have problems so that they can start to look at innovative solutions to certain problems. And so the Data Science Campus is something that I would probably direct your audience to kind of look into in terms of helping government develop skills in analytics and machine learning that will be relevant for the next few years to come.
Gosh, we'll have to put that into the calls to action or the show notes, just how folks can get to that, Chris. Sounds like an amazing opportunity.
It's initiatives like that I think are going to help scale this, and it's the scaling that's going to be more important. I'm very fortunate. I have 4 children, my daughter's turning 9 tomorrow, and in our world, we talk about technology quite a bit. There's a lot of stuff behind me, specifically things like the football player, right? Again, that harks back to my father. A lot of moving parts in his stereo system, whereas today, I've got to be careful what I say because I've got one in the room here. But you call out a phrase and you say play some music, and it just gets streamed over. It becomes kind of disconnected. There's a bit of artificial intelligence goes on. It's all very interesting, but your music plays, but there's no tactical aspect to it anymore. People don't own music in terms of physical form anymore. So I've started to rebel in certain areas myself in that regard. But mostly in terms of my children, I want my children to know that these things are physical, and even down to how records are pressed and made and how they generate music. The technology is quite fascinating in that respect.
Oh wow, I love that.
Yeah, I love it as well because you caught me off guard. I was just literally reading part of the book here. We're looking through it, and Kieran will have to stop me from going on a rant because it is such a core thing to what we do at the AI Journal, which is why we fell in love with it, because it's something from a personal background where I saw my first machine vision application and I didn't have a clue how it worked. And all of a sudden, head of marketing, I had to figure out how to do this. And I was thinking, right, get me 10 different websites, get me an academic journal. I need to learn this overnight pretty much because I need to market this. But it's so important because just looking at this example here with learning from patterns, it's core to being we were speaking to the government at AI Summit back in September, and they were saying, how are we going to get people into these roles? Because they're still coming out of university and they don't understand how to be a data scientist, or they don't understand how to learn this data or become a ML ops engineer or any of these key fields that we need today. So I think it's really key. But before I do go on my rant, because I can see Kieran looking, I'd love to know what you think, Chris, of where do you see the next 5 years then? What's the road ahead do you see, and what kind of questions or advice would you give people, maybe from a junior level, people that are still perhaps in school if they're watching this, but also on a commercial level, from a business level? What would you think?
It's a very broad question, that one. In terms of 5 years, so I do spend a bit of my time as part of my role looking at technology trends.
Yeah.
Those trends over the last 5 years have very much been the move to cloud and various technologies like that. And we've seen containerization come into place. And so at Cloudera, our technology is aligned to those trends. Yeah. Looking forward, I think we're starting to see things develop very, very quickly. So if I talk to automotive companies, they all have an electric fleet strategy. We electrify the fleet, electrify the vehicles. With that comes a whole raft of additional considerations around logistics. You don't want your bus not being being abandoned somewhere because you can't charge it. So logistics becomes really, really critical. Starting to automate more and more. And I think what we'll see is a trend toward identifying roles for humans that are more generalized, because the specialized tasks are better delivered by an AI. The really cool example I do like is one of our clients in the financial services industry recognized that all of their agreements, all their contracts are very similar, with just some very small changes. So they fed it all into a machine learning process, and they were able to reduce the number of lawyer hours that they use by 360,000 hours in a year, which saved them costs. But what's interesting there is when you think about that is, okay, what skills are we going to need to train for? Not just in machine learning and computing, but outside of that domain. We're still going to need lawyers, but maybe they're not going to be sitting there redlining contracts anymore. Maybe that's the future. And then that makes you think in terms of what would that mean, not just in computer science in that domain, but in other domains as well. It's like the steel example. You're not going to have somebody necessarily involved in the quality process. That might be fully automated. You might not have somebody that's tuning the plant for efficiency. Again, that might be entirely automated. So it's identifying, well, what skills will be more prevalent in the development of what might be claimed the next iteration of human innovation around machine learning.
Love it. And what would you say then? What would to break it up, because that was a bit broad from the last time, but what would your question be from a perspective of someone looking to get involved with what Cloudera does, or looking to start their kind of journey? What would your question or piece of advice be to them?
I suppose if you want to help organizations store and manage vast amounts of data, but then take that and apply it to really hard real world problems, let us know. We're recruiting across our business. To your point earlier as well, data science and machine learning is one small facet of what we term it a series of patterns. Before that is data engineering and data warehousing. After that is model deployment and operations and management. So again, we're recruiting for roles across this whole breadth in terms of helping not just Cloudera be more data driven. It's something we're always doing more of, but helping our customers also recognize the benefits of doing that.
I love it. Like a focus on a total ecosystem, which is awesome to see, Chris.
Yeah.
Love it. And to wrap up, it's been a great session today. We learned a lot about what we need to be doing and the importance of analytics and some great case studies. Where can people find out more about you, Chris, and where can they find out more about Cloudera?
Welcome to connect to me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place from a business perspective. In terms of Cloudera, if you go to our website, a couple of terms to search for. If you search for Fast Forward Labs, that will land you on our research in machine learning. So we have a team within our organization of data scientists, and they take problems and put them into practice. And many of those problems are delivered as prototypes, interactive prototypes. So we have one in life science around federated learning, which maintains privacy. And we have another in retail around, it's actually in telecommunications, around model interpretability. So it's around ethics. How did the model make its decision? If you want to learn more about that, Fast Forward Labs, take a read of those reports, back to the research piece, do the research, some great material there. If you want to accelerate that, you can take a test drive of our CDP platform, Cloudera Data Platform, and in there is Cloudera Machine Learning, and we have a capability called AMPS. You can click, and with a single click of a button, it will materialize those Fast Forward Labs prototypes for you. So you can, not only can you read up about them, you can then materialize them in the tools that you might use and demonstrate them to your business sponsors as well. So that would be my recommendation.
Love it. Lots of great resources to get to, and put it all in the show notes alongside what we'll be doing with this book. And Chris, I really want to appreciate you and say thank you for your time today. Really enjoyed it. Great episode coming, and thanks for joining the show.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Kieran.